What's going on, guys? This is Qazi. Welcome back to another epic video. Today we're going to be looking at 3 mistakes that beginner colorists make while recovering their highlights. I'm going to show you all the wrong ways first, and then we're going to jump into a pro way to do it right. Now let me just say this, not handling your highlights properly is the fastest giveaway that you're an amateur. It's not easy, it takes practice, but before you even get to that part, you need to know the right way to do it, because there's definitely right and wrong way when you talk about recovering highlights. I should also mention that the techniques that you're going to be picking up here are not exclusive to DaVinci Resolve. These concepts will be directly applicable if you're in Final Cut 10, Premiere Pro, Avid, whatever have you. So just keep that in mind. And also, I want to encourage you guys to go back to your last project after you watch this video and apply these techniques to some of the shots, and the results are gonna be drastic in a great way. If you're a beginner filmmaker who wants to make their work stand out, color grading is one of the most effective ways to do that. If you're coming from Premiere Pro or Final Cut 10, then looking at a node-based software like Resolve will just confuse the heck out of you. In this free training, you're not only going to learn everything about nodes, you will also learn to build the perfect node tree regardless of the project that you're working on. I will end the session with an extended Q&A. These questions came from you guys. Click the link in the description to sign up for this free training. And guys, if you're enjoying the content, it will mean the world to me if you smash that like button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, share this with friends if you can, make sure you're following me on Instagram, and let's roll the intro. All right, guys, let's get this show on the road. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cover my nodes so we can actually see what's happening here. And before we jump in and look at all the mistakes that beginners make and then how pros do it, let's just analyze some professional work and see how they deal with highlights. So this is from Hacksaw Ridge. And if we look at this shot, this is what's going on. Okay, so I want to break it down for you guys so it makes a lot more sense. This right here are our blown out highlights. They're not coming back. Even when they were captured in camera, they were just beyond the point of recovery. Then you got these right there that can be recovered. So when you look at this right there, it's that right there. So this is what's going on over here. Okay, and you can read it on the scope. These are recoverable, they're living more over here. Okay, so that's what's going on. Now that's our first example, right? I want to show you this one right there. Then you got a scenario like this. So what's happening over here? We got our sky, and our sky is living right there, there, and there. And that's the beauty of shooting with a high-end camera where there's tons of dynamic range that you can have your subject looking beautiful, and then your sky could be just perfect. It looks gorgeous. And that right there is what's creating that cyan that they got going on in the sky to portray this warm day feel. Okay. Now, what I want to show you is this guy right here. What is that? And where can we see it on the frame? It's the specular highlight that we can spot it right there. Now, specular highlights are blown out highlights, and it usually appears on shiny spots. So especially on a skin, like the light is reflecting off and we can see it. I mean, think of like headlamps on cars, like the headlights. Think of a practical in a movie or a show where you just see it in the frame and it's all blown out. And it's not blown out in a nasty way. Like this is not, it doesn't look bad. I mean, that's what actually shows the dynamic range of the entire image. So you just need to know that anytime you see a specular highlight, know that it will be impossible to recover it. And it's not the point to recover specular highlights. You got to let them blow out to create that range in our entire image. Okay, so be aware of that. We got our recoverable highlights and we got our specular and our blown out highlights that, you know, you don't want to fight that battle. You're not going to win. Let's look at some examples from the boys. So what's happening over here? Once again, if we look at this shot right there, look at what is going on all the way over here. It's this right there. Okay, so these are highlights that are beyond the point of recovery. So you let them go. What's happening over here? These are recoverable highlights and they're being recovered right here. So that's something that you need to understand. You don't want to bring these down because what's going to happen is that your footage is going to look muddy. And it happens all the time. I see amateur grades where that is just a common theme. What is happening over here? What is this right there? It's that specular highlight right there. And one thing that you need to realize is that with specular highlights, you want to keep them as white as possible because this is how our eyes perceive it. So if you look at the lamp or a bulb straight on, it will look bright white. But if it is a 3200 Kelvin light, then the room is going to look warm. But if you just stare at the bulb, it's going to look bright white. And that's exactly what's happening over here. So you have to be careful of that because too many times I've seen people create their grades and then they will take this with it. So it will have like the green sitting here and the blue sitting here and then the red channel up there. That's not how it works. Now, what is this right here? That right there is this right here, and this right here. So it is, again, creating that teal. And these are recoverable highlights because that's the beauty of shooting with high-end cameras. So they were easily able to pull these down and make it look really gorgeous. Okay, so I wanted to kind of bring that up and give you some examples. So when we get into our shot and look at what are the challenges, it will make a lot more sense. So now let's just do that. So what do we see when we check out our shot? What is this right here, that right there, and that right there? What that is this right there. So that is what you see on these spots, okay? And look at the sharp curve or the sharp little line that you see right there. That just means that it's beyond the point of recovery. It's blown out, okay? Now, you might go, but it's not blown out because we're looking at this and everything is in control, but we're looking at the log image. As soon as I apply a Rec. 709 conversion, this is going to be blown out, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, the recoverable highlights here are this right there, that right there, this right there, and that's what we see in all these areas. These are recoverable highlights. That right there is this right here. These are recoverable highlights that we can work with. So that is the first thing that you need to do to understand what you're up against and what should be your strategy. Now let's jump in and look at one of the 3 mistakes beginner colorists make. Now there's a couple of different ways to grade this. One would be to just use your primaries and grade it. That could be a way that people can do, but most of the time beginners want as much help that they can get. So what you want to do, or what you probably have seen on YouTube videos, is to convert your image to Rec. 709. So in this case, the fastest way to do that would be to just drop on RE's LUT that is provided and is inside DaVinci Resolve. You don't have to pay for it. So as soon as you do that, now your image is properly converted to Rec. 709 and it looks pretty dark. Another way to do that would have been a little bit more advanced way, the color space transform, which I would recommend instead of the LUT. But again, if you're an amateur, and let's assume that you are a beginner, and if that's the case, then you're not going to be going the CST route. You're going to be probably doing this. So as soon as you apply that, look what just happened. Look at what happened to our window right there. It's gone. It's blown out. Okay. So the beginner colorists would do this. They'll start off with their gamma so they can see more of their image. They'll take their lift and they'll bring it down to keep the contrast nice, and then bring their gamma up a little bit more, something like that. And then something like this, and then they'll give it some saturation. So not too much. Let's just not exaggerate too much, but something like that. That's what they're going to do. They will have limited skill set when it comes to color grading, so they just wouldn't know what to do or how to control that at all, so they'll disregard it completely. So that's one of the 3 mistakes a beginner colorist would make. Let's check out the second of the 3 mistakes a beginner colorist would make. Now, the first type of colorist didn't care about his highlights. Now, the second type of colorist is going to do the opposite. He or she is going to suppress their highlights too much. So first thing that I'm going to do is I've already created a version, or I'm actually going to create a version. I'm going to go ahead and reset this. And this time I'm going to show you a second type of beginner colorist perspective on this, which is going to be suppressing your highlights. So he'll drop a LUT and he will freak the F out, checking out his scopes and be like, oh my God, this is blown out. I can't do this. This is just the biggest no-no. So their first response is going to be to take their gain and pull it down, okay? And they'll bring this down, and then they're going to go in their gamma and lift it. And then they're going to take their gain and keep bringing it down. And then they're going to take their lift and bring it down, okay? And then they're going to lift their gamma up more, and then somewhere around here, and then keep their gain somewhere around here because they're just really afraid of blowing out their highlights. Okay. And then they're going to give it some saturation. Now, when you look at this, this definitely looks better than the first example, right? Because I mean, if I go back and show you this just looks too digital, looks too weird. This at least looks quote unquote somewhat film-like. That is somewhat true, but there's so much of our image that we're not taking advantage of. Like all this detail. I mean, look at the contrast. I mean, the contrast is gone. SDR already is giving you only 6 to 7 stops of effective dynamic range. Now, if your camera shot at 15 stops, which this did, you're only left with 6 to 7 stops to work with, and then you are crushing your image even so much more and only taking advantage of this space. I mean, that's just not the way to go about it. So neither of these ways are really doable, right? Because I mean, we just overly compressed our highlights and now everything just looks muddy and weird. If we do a playback and we look at it, it just doesn't look or feel graded. So that is the other type of a beginner colorist who would overly suppress his or her highlights. Now let's jump into the third type of beginner colorist. Once again, I'm gonna create a new version. I'm gonna go ahead and go back to my base. Now I'm gonna show you from a perspective of another beginner colorist who is a bit more advanced than the other two colorists, but still doesn't know how to properly work his node tree. So he will do this. He'll go ahead and just bring up his gamma, bring down his gain a little bit, bring up his gamma to keep his image looking pretty good. He'll bring down his lift, bring up his gamma. Okay, so our contrast is looking pretty good. He's gonna leave it somewhere around here. He's gonna give it some saturation, let's say, and everything is looking fine. And now what he's gonna do is he's like, hey, I know a few tricks to recover these highlights. So he will go under his qualifier and he will go ahead, select this, and then look at his qualifier. And he's gonna go, okay, this is great. Now I can just bring this down. And then he's gonna take his gain and he's gonna bring this down. Okay, so this is what's gonna happen. It's gonna look really weird and he's gonna be like, all right, let me go finesse this because this is not really working. So he's gonna go ahead, open this up a little bit, and he's gonna try to mess with it to see what needs to happen for this to look a little bit better, right? So, I mean, I'm giving that beginner a lot of credit that he will know how to work the qualifier. But let's just say if he does, he will blur it out and he's going to be like, okay, that is looking somewhat decent. Like this is not looking bad. I've recovered my highlights somewhat. I mean, look at this right there. They're all blown out. And now he was able to pull this down quite a bit. So that does not look bad. Now, the most obvious problem with this approach is what we can see right there. I mean, this right there wasn't initially there, right? So, I mean, this little halo around everything, like, look at this. This is there and it's distracting and it's very, very noticeable. Okay. So this is, and it becomes more visible when you kind of pull out, right? So like this is before, this is after, and this is everywhere. I mean, that, I'm going to move this over so you guys can see it. Like that right there. And if I do before and after, like, look at this little circle, that is there. Okay. So that is one thing. Beginners try to use a lot of keys. And I just put out a video where I show you one of the most common mistakes beginner colorists make. But even this colorist who is a little bit more advanced and knows like how to use qualifiers or what qualifiers are, I wouldn't go, as far as saying knows how to use qualifiers, but has heard of qualifiers and is trying to use it to bring the highlights down, is still failing to do so. On paper, looks like he is recovering them, but that's not the right way to do it. Now let's look at how a professional would recover highlights in this particular shot. All right, so for the sake of keeping our node tree pretty simple, I'm gonna stick to the basics. So first thing that I'm gonna do is delete this node and delete that node, okay? So once we apply our LUT to our image, what we wanna do is, instead of making changes after the node, which we will, we wanna make our primary changes before the node. So I'm gonna go ahead and now the node tree sequence is everything. I have a 1 hour long webinar that you guys can check out, and link is in the description. Node tree is everything, how you properly set that up. Okay, so here we are. I'm gonna go before instead of after the node and making these changes. Now here, why is that? Why am I doing this instead of like making changes after the LUT node? Because I want to borrow as much as I can from my log image, which is this right here. I would rather manipulate this than what happened after applying the LUT. Because after applying the LUT, what's gone is gone. But before, we had all of this information available. Okay, so that's why I'm going to my primaries first to build my base grade. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my primaries. I'm going to take my offset wheel and I'm going to raise it. I'm going to raise it to a point where my dude looks good. My focus is on my hero, and in this case, that's my subject. He's the main dude. So I'm going to keep it somewhere around here. Everything is looking good. What's the next step? The next step is taking my lift and bringing it down a little bit so I still have some of that contrast going. And I'm going to keep it somewhere around here. I'm not going to do too much of that. I'm going to take my gamma. I'm going to raise it up just a tiny bit. I'm going to take my lift and I'm going to bring it down. And now what I want to do is I want to take my gain and I want to try to pull this down. Not too much though. I want to keep it somewhere around here. Again, focus on the dude. As long as he's looking natural, everything is good. Now I'm going to go after my LUT node, and here I'm going to go in my log wheels. I'm going to take my shadows and I'm going to pull them down. Okay. And once I pull that down, it gives me a lot of very nice contrast, but that's too much. Again, focus is on my dude. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under my low range. I'm going to open that up. So I still get to have all my detail and focus on my dude, but still I get tons of contrast. So this right there is looking pretty good. Okay. Everything is looking pretty good. Now, what I want to do is I want to create a new node. I want to give it some saturation, and I'm going to keep it somewhere around 60-ish, nothing too much. So let's just start naming our nodes to keep it organized. This was my log. This is my rec 709. So that's my conversion LUT, basically. And then this right here is my primaries or my CDLs. Now, the trick to recovering your highlights the best way possible is to make the highlight recovery corrector before any other corrector on your node tree. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to create another node right here, which is going to be before my primaries. I'm going to call it highlights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under my qualifier, and instead of dragging and grabbing all of this, which is the amateur way of recovering your highlights, what I will do is I will go and just focus on my Luma qualifier. Okay, and I'm going to hit Shift H so you guys can see what we're selecting. And basically, look at the softness here, because I want everything to blend really nicely and look natural. And I'm just going for my highlights, nothing else, right? So I'm just going to go somewhere around here, and I'm going to just keep it really, really limited to the high end of my image, okay? Just like I want to only affect that area. I don't care about anything else, okay? So this is where we're at right now. Once I make my selection, what I want to do is I still want to open it up a little bit so there's more room to breathe, right? So I mean, I will probably do maybe something like this. And let's just keep it at that for now. What's the next step? What do we need to do to really control this now? Is this. First of all, we need to remember this is blown out, so we're never going to bring it back to a point where we're suppressing our highlights, okay? So I'm going to go under my gain and I'm going to start pulling this down. I'm going to be pretty aggressive and I'm going to bring it down to something like that. And you might go, dude, this looks like garbage. What did you just do? And it does. But remember when we were looking at the boys example where they kept their blown out part pretty neutral in color? Well, that's not what's happening here, right? Like, look at the colors here of that highlighted area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under my gain and I'm going to start moving this around, okay? Until we balance it out just a little bit. I don't want to do too much. I'm not looking for too much. I'm just looking for enough. So even if I do something like that, and if I do before and after, look at how far we've come. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to make sure that it is right at the cusp of like blowing out, because that's where it feels and looks natural. So the beauty of this is that if you're working on this scene and there's a bunch of shots in this area, you can copy paste this node tree on all of those shots and it's going to translate because you've already set it up to like, if you're going to nail your exposure from shot to shot, as soon as you get to that point, this will come into effect and start doing its thing and protect your highlights and even them out and make them look proper like this. Like, look at what we just did. And we protected our highlights. All right, so now what I'm going to do is click on this little guy so we can look at all our versions. I'm going to go ahead and hide this guy and let's make it bigger and look at all the different versions that we got going on. Okay, and again, the focus of this exercise was to work on our highlights and get the most out of our image. So if you look at the first amateur choice, which was, you know, just blowing out highlights, then we got our second grade. Like I said, it does look pretty filmic and cool, but look at the contrast difference, right? Like, look at the contrast difference between this shot and that shot. I mean, just look at the contrast difference and like how much detail we have here in the pro grade. I mean, look at this right there to that right there, how much information we got without really losing anything. We're gaining everything by doing it the pro way. And then look at another variance of a beginner colorist trying to recover highlights. What's happening here compared to what's happening to our highlights and how gentle they are and how they're reacting. And this is probably the smoothest transition in our highlights to shadow areas than all of these. Like, I mean, even this one has a little bit of edging and we didn't even qualify anything. And then obviously this one is just overly suppressed, doesn't look right. It's way too flat. I mean, look at this right there to look at that right there. Okay, so this is the right way to do it, but you know, we're never done, right? I mean, we're never done at this. Like, I mean, now that I've gotten to this point, now I just got the itch to keep enhancing this shot and making it a little bit better. So I'm going to create another node. And this is, again, just extracurricular. You don't have to do it. Now let's just make this shot a little bit better. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go under my log wheels again. This time I'm going to call this node my skin node. And what I want to do is I want to go under my log wheels. I'm going to take my midtone and my focus is my dude. I want to give him a little bit more life. So I'm going to go ahead and just start pulling that over a little bit like that. Not too much. I don't want to exaggerate anything. Just want to add a little bit more life. And what that's doing is a couple of different things. Look at what it's doing over here to this light. It's giving it that Joker thing. It's bringing that in and making it look really cool. More importantly, look at how much nicer the blanket looks than this weird yellow. So it's doing that. Look at her skin. So much more life is coming into her skin. And then look at our dude. Subtle change, but goes a long way. Not to mention then it increases the color contrast between this to that. So all that is happening with so little. Like, all we're doing is just this. Okay. So again, I just want to touch it a little bit. I don't want to do too much. So that's all I'm going to be doing here. And then what we can do is just create another node and we can just go into our editable splines. And then this could be our pop node. And I'm going to try to do this and see if I like it. If I don't like it, I'm going to go back. Okay. So let me see. This is where we were and this is where we are. I mean, honestly, it's not the worst change. It's not the best change. I don't want to go too far with this though. So I kind of like it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this too. And I want to open this up a little bit too, because I really want to open up the bottom part of my image. So something like that is looking pretty good now, right? So I just really wanted to bring my dude up a little bit more. Now, since we have this already created, we can go back in here and go back into our gain and just try to bring it down a little bit. Like, don't overdo it, and just something like this. So now remember what I said, like, once you make changes, if you have this recovery node up here, that's the beauty of it. We can always go back and make it better. So like, look at it without the recovery node, how everything is looking. And then with the recovery node, so much detail is back and it's just embedded in our image. And then after that, let's top it off with our grain, because we must. I mean, nothing is ever done, like I said, without having some sort of grain. So I'm going to throw the 16mm archival on it, and it makes it look so nice. Obviously, it would be impossible to see on YouTube. So let's just do even an archival print, which is really thick. So if I go, hopefully you guys will be able to see it. So if I pause it here and do before and then do after, so you should be able to see it, hopefully. So this is where we are. And let's do this. I'm gonna come out of here and I'm gonna kill all of this. And we're gonna start with the top. So this is what we had. And then we started with just a Rec 709 LUT. And after that, went back, did my primaries, went under my log wheels to keep the contrast up, added some saturation to just give our image a little bit more pop, went and showed you the right way to recover your highlights, worked on the skin just a little bit, nothing too drastic, and then added a pop, let's call this pop, and then finally added the grain, and that is our final grade. Before we check out the final look in full screen, if we do one more comparison, and now anybody, if you guys are going, well, this is not fair because you added more love to this node. Well, the thing is that I couldn't have added more love to any of these because they were not set up properly. So the foundation is the key, and building up your node tree the right way is everything. And once it was handled properly and set up the right way from the start, we can do a lot of push and pull and always go back and just readjust certain things. So just look at the big difference, right? I mean, just look at the colors and the skin tones and everything that we have here. Everything pops, nothing is blown out, and it's all natural. Now, this is just, I can save this as a power grade, and there you go. This is one of your grades for a project. You can just slap this on when you jump on a new project, and there's no hundreds of qualifiers going on for skin tones, this and that and the other thing. Nothing is going to go out of whack. You can apply this as your base grade, make minor adjustments, and just go from there. So on that note, let's check out the final look in full screen. Now, as you can see how important it is to build a perfect node tree, and that's why I keep stressing on watching my free training, which will genuinely give you the foundation that you need to start your color grading career. So link is in the description if you're interested. It is absolutely free. On that note, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to my channel for more awesomeness, and I will see you guys in the next video.